an initial idea to gather a community, or to create a community specifically for women who have not studied anything related to tech, who don't work necessarily in tech, but who have a huge interest in the sector, and who would be eager to explore what programming is, what you can do with that, and also eventually follow a career in the tech sector. So Fearless into Tech is volunteer-based association. We try to do our best to organize and help the community as best as we can. In the last year, we started with small programming circles. After Svetlana's amazing introduction into the programming languages, people could decide what kind of language they're interested in and form small circles where they learn whatever they chose to learn. And Fearless into Tech provides resources. We've been also working on getting connections to mentors, so that the circles have somebody to talk to and somebody who guides them through the learning process. And we also try to organize these kind of events. And since our community, or since our approach is a holistic approach, to say so, we not only focus on the hard skills, but we consider the same way also soft skills, and how you can combine the skills that you already have and take it to the next level by adding some hard skills to that. And that is why we also offer some events related more to career paths and career coaching. And the webinar today is going to be the first in a series of events where we're going to tackle different issues. So you're most welcome to join our community on Facebook, or you can also follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter. Or if you have specific questions, you can also always write to fearlessintotech@gmail.com. And without any further ado, I would just leave the floor to Svetlana to introduce us and guide us once again through programming. Thank you, Svetlana.
Yeah, thank you for inviting. So again, thank you for the Fearless into Tech community, and yeah, to Ellie to give me the honor of presenting here again. So about a year ago, I presented already. So I'd say that my talk right now would be almost exactly the same talk as the last year. So maybe if you already seen it, or if you already done some programming, or if you maybe started working as a software engineer, it's not going to be too much new information for you. But if you, as Ellie described, is really new to the field, and you only starting your journey here and trying to see what it is that you can do here and what it is in there for you, then this is the talk for you. This is what it's tailored towards. So I'm going to just share my screen and yeah, to show you some slides. And please let me know if you can actually, if everything is functioning well. So especially Ellie, please feel free to interrupt me if you see that there's some malfunction going on with this talk.
Looks perfect, Svetlana.
Yes,
Everything
so,
fine.
Yes, so right now, yeah. So I'll just start with this first. Yeah, with this first title slide, because yeah, with this very catchy name, What the Tech. I didn't come up with it, like you came up with it, the Fearless into Tech admins, but I really like it, so I'm totally keeping it for maybe some of my next presentations. Yeah, so just a little bit about me. So it is, basically who is talking to you today. I'm originally from Russia, and I actually didn't come to software engineering and programming right away in my life. So I started my education it's bachelor in economics, and only then I switched to computer science. And then again, after I worked for a few years as a software engineer, I continued with my PhD in bioinformatics at DTU. So I'm actually quite familiar with this feeling when you feel like you need a change, and like something is pushing you towards making a change in your career and your life, and you're just trying to navigate your way in that space. And so actually this topic of like getting into tech and figuring out what's going on there is very dear to my heart. So I'm always happy to help if you would have any questions, or if you kind of need some kind of mentor to get you through these initial steps that can be really confusing. So usually, sometimes when we hear about tech and programming, especially for the first time, many things can seem really confusing and not very intuitive and not very friendly to a new person. So, for example, if you were trying to search Wikipedia for what the programming is, that it gives you this big definition about that it's the process of designing and building an executable computer program for accomplishes a specific computing task, which doesn't, I don't know, it doesn't tell me necessarily very much if I'm just someone who just trying to get into the field. So I think the best way how we can learn about what programming is and what programming does is through looking at the set of examples about what kind of tasks can appear to a software engineer and any technical person in adjacent fields. And then we can kind of see what are the different paths and careers that one could take in that area. So just as a very, something that you most certainly already maybe a little bit familiar with, and something that many of you may start their journey with is a web development, is something that the internet is made of, is kind of what web browsers are showing, and something that basically fills our life a lot these days. So this is kind of a very common example of what software development is and what it does. So let's look at this, for example, this Amazon front page, web page. So if you look at the web page, it looks like a set of pictures and clickable buttons that hold certain functionality. And this is all powered on the background by this kind of three foundations of web development, which is of the front-end development, which is HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And if you might have heard a little bit about some of them already, so but just roughly, HTML would be a programming language that describes a structure of the page. So it would say, okay, we need several building blocks here. So we need some menu items, and we need some placeholder for a picture and for the background, and some clickable buttons. And then the CSS would be something that's responsible for the style. It would tell you, okay, let's make those placeholders white boxes with some pictures in them, and let's put this image over there, and let's have this icon have this size and the color, something like this. And then JavaScript would actually be something that gives you all this responsive functionality, that gives you this adaptive design. So it's basically telling you how the elements on the page should act, and like what will happen if you click things and so on. So this is just a brief overview of like the front end of the web page, of what it is that is actually behind it. And so the front-end developer would be someone who actually navigates that and who makes, puts it all together and makes it all possible for us to look at those beautiful responsive pages. And of course, as many things in life, that's just the tip of the iceberg. Normally, together with the front end, you would have something that's called backend, which is also in many situations, it's massively huge, especially in the case of such services, the Amazon or Google. Especially with Google, you could see that the front end or like whatever you see on their main page is very minimalistic, kind of purposefully kept, very minimal, but everything that's happened on the background of any Google search is actually overwhelmingly large and complex. And this is often something that we call backend. And what backend is basically a certain service implemented in some programming language that is connected to a database. So databases and services are like a very common concept in any development that you will probably do. So database is basically a data storage unit. So it doesn't have much other function, but like, okay, this is the information that we have, and that's how we store it, and that's how we make sure it is secure, and it is it's like not liable to any faults or if someone wants to break into your data. And service, it's something that takes the data from the database and makes it accessible to you. So for example, in this, it is often the case that an average web application would be made in a way that in the front end, the user sees the front end, and the user wants to make something happen on the front end. So the user would say, I want to take that item, put it in my basket, and I want to order 3 items like this. And then the front end would send the request to a service, first of all asking what kind of like items we have, so we can display them to a user, and how many of this particular item we have, because the user just requested 3, and we want to know if that's actually something that we owe it's something that we have in our storage. In this case, service would be going to a database and requesting the database to give it information, and then the service would kind of figure out how to best arrange it so it's presentable by the front end, and then kind of pass it back all the way to the front end. So it's normally when you click something, that's roughly the stages that your request will go through, and then kind of back. So database replies to the service does certain manipulations, and sends it back to the front end. So the programming languages that you would need to build a backend service, that's of course not an exhaustive list, because there is a lot of programming languages in the world, but I'd say those are the most common ones. So they are programming languages that are normally used for building backend services, and they also something that's called maybe general purpose languages, because they can do many different things, and they roughly implement things that we are talking about. And also database has its own language. It's called SQL, and it's the special programming language that's tailored solely to how to make requests to get this information about the data that we own. And again, because those are something that's called general purpose languages, that they can serve a wide range of needs. For example, something that tries to log you in, something that creates user profiles. Also, it can be something completely different, something, for example, that runs certain calculations on the background, or something that updates certain information on the background, for example, aggregates new stock market prices and tries to make it in a way that other services can use it and utilize this information in some other way. Sometimes when you perform a lot of very heavy computational, maybe distributed computations, that is something that's not the most efficiently done by those general purpose languages, and it's something that needs to be more specialized, so to be more efficient and performant. And it's often the case if you are working in the gaming industry, if you are working on something that has high load, like services like Google or Amazon are good examples of it, or also many scientific applications would also have this need for performing many heavy computations simultaneously. And in this case, we have more specialized languages like C, C++, and upcoming programming language Rust, which is fairly new, but it already gained a lot of popularity, so I think it's fair to include it here. And often this language would not be something that's talking directly to the front end, because they're not really made for being backend languages, but they would be part of the bigger system that performs heavier calculations. Also, in this picture that I showed you before, that has this like very nice and simple structure of user clicking a button, and that calling a service, and that calling a database, that happens, like that exists a lot in real life in many services. But already when you have, like, for example, a web shop of like average size, not something very small, then you already facing that situation that you have many different users. They are coming from many different devices. Like, someone comes from the computer, someone comes from Windows, someone comes from Internet Explorer browser. That is usually a nightmare for any developer, because they always kind of forget about this one. And then someone will come from the mobile device that has its own thing. And like, all these different technologies would require different different maybe backend call service in them, because they would display sometimes different information. And also they would require like some different endpoints. Also, the backend service is not normally something that's just one thing serving one thing. It's often distributed system that performs many different functions. Just like we described, some of those different functions can be high-load systems, and then the services often call each other, and they also might call different databases that are distributed and being held like in several data centers, or holding different information. So for example, in the big companies where the data is very precious and cannot be like lost, it is a very common practice for big companies to have the same information copied over several data centers. So it's never lost. So if one fails, you would get the copy of information from another place. But this is all becoming quite a big, quite complex system. And as any complex system, when something becomes that complex, it requires some special attention. It cannot just go on, existing on its own. So for that, you would need something that's called DevOps, or system administrator, which is a person who makes sure that this complex system of different services runs smoothly, and then there is nothing really that's falling too much, and then everything is deployed on time and everything is secure. So the examples of these tasks that sysadmin or DevOps person would perform would contain the deployment of a new code changes when considering that the test pass, or maybe if you experience a heavy load on the system, for example, during the Black Friday or big sales, or recently when Danish government announced that there would be certain frozen money from your vacation given to you, and then you could have noticed that it says, oh, we experienced an extremely high load and people requesting their money, and so you might be like, somebody's in line. And that is actually a system administrator job of taking care of this and making sure that your system will be operational even under this extreme heavy circumstances. Another aspect, like another type of programming languages, which is maybe something that's kind of quite different from what we just described. Those are programming languages that are tailored for statistics, analytics, and data science, which is a very, very hot topic these days for good reasons, because it has been showing really good progress in many areas like computer vision and things like that. And I actually also do some data science with my PhD project, working with some biological data and chemical structures. So this is an extremely widely used set of skills and things that people do with programming. So I think it is very necessary to include it to this presentation, so you're aware about this, that this career path is also might be something for you. So it is something, those are programming languages. You will hear a lot about Python if you do any kind of data science, or about R if you're working with statistics, which is also pretty much data science. And also, if you're working in a company settings, you would often need SQL to actually fetch those data that you work with from a certain database that the company would have. And those, like all this whole set of skills would be, and like statistical methods, it's often called artificial intelligence and in some cases it's a very justified term, and in some cases it's more of a marketing term. But nevertheless, this is something that's really worth thinking about, maybe also as your career path. Yeah, so the needs for data science and statistics and this kind of programming languages also include a wide range of things. So you can do all kinds of operations. So if you're working in the banking sector, you might be interested in modeling what kind of users would be more likely to pay their credits back. Or if you're working in e-commerce area, you would be very interested in modeling some kind of user behavior. And all of that, like all this kind of analytics these days requires also a fair share of programming skills. Another career path that is also a very interesting field. It's not the most obvious field. I don't know many people who chose this as their like first attempt to enter the tech, but it's still, I think it's very interesting thing, and it's very promising. Also these days it's growing more and more. It's something that's sometimes called Internet of Things. And what it basically means is when you directly program operating system, or kind of talk directly to the smaller devices where you have, so the thing is when you have this Internet of Things, you know, like smart housing or, you know, some small responsive devices, the point with them that they don't really have a lot of like massive amount of memory and computational power associated with them, in which case you really want your programs to be as efficient as possible. And for that you use those what's called low-level programming languages that actually kind of talk directly to the operating system, or they are making an operating system. And that is a very exciting field as well. So it's, I think if you find that interesting, it's really worth learning more about it. And so with that rough overview I made, so I'm I also showed this plot last year. So there are different programming languages for different purposes, and here's what's listed here in the right are those programming languages by popularity. And what the popularity is in this case is how many people, like I think the developers were replying to the question of how often do you use this language, like daily or like monthly or so on. And you can see that like all these front-end tools like JavaScript and HTML and SQL as well, they kind of up high, maybe not because all the people are like front-end developers full-time, but mostly because they are it is very common to use it from time to time, because this like front-end needs, they often pop up in your work, even if you're a backend developer sometimes. Also, SQL is obviously very high because it's also something that's used a lot by different things, because it also, like the database popped up in our discussion before also several times. And then Python would be very popular because you could see that it has many different application fields. So Python is becoming a really one of the most important tools for data science, but it is still a very common backend programming language. And also it is used a lot in admin work, like in DevOps and sysadmin work. So that's why it is very, very popular and opens many possible job opportunities. Yeah, but that's, so you could see roughly how the languages are distributed by their popularity and their function here. So this was an overview about programming languages. And just to maybe wrap up a little bit, I wanted to talk about different career paths and different, like what actually developers say about their jobs in their, like in this service. So for this information I used, to gain this information, I used this Stack Overflow service, which is it's basically a big knowledge base for developers. So people ask and answer questions there. And if you start any kind of programming, you will quickly end up on the Stack Overflow website. It's pretty impossible to kind of avoid it. And it means so actually the wide range developers are using it. So I would say that the results of their questionnaires can be quite objective. So that's why I chose this as my source of information. So this is like something that shows different kind of a distribution on different salaries in IT. And you could see that, yeah, management position, I think it's kind of makes sense that they are quite highly paid. And but what's actually something I didn't know, something I found interested about it, is that DevOps specialists and site reliability engineers, which is also kind of a subset of system administration kind of task, they actually the highest ranked IT position, in salary worldwide. So this is, just to be clear, this is not like Danish market or any particular market. This is a certain aggregation from all over the world. So I'm not really sure how the things are on the Danish market here, but I still think it's a quite an interesting piece of information. Also what I thought, like, since we are the women self-starters, and I'm kind of was curious about, and also it is like a lot of gender stereotypes often associated with this IT and tech jobs. And that's why I thought it would be interesting to look at this distribution over different like percentage of like men and women on different IT positions. So here we like on this y-axis here, we see that like 15x here, it means that there is 15 times as many men as women in the tech industry, and 15, you can see that dashed line, it means that this is an average over all the fields, so without distribution over the different types of jobs. And yes, and there we see the total number of developers on the x-axis. So the more developers we have here, it would mean that like many people have that same profession. For example, so you could, from here, you could see that most of the people would have the backend development profession, because as I mentioned, it's kind of the most popular kind of programming, and it serves many different functions in many different fields. And this is also something that defines kind of an average gender balance in different IT jobs. So here high up, we see this again, the DevOps field popped up also as an outlier. So this is something where there is way more men than women in this field. And those fields which have relatively more women compared to other fields would be the data science, analytics, and statistics related job. Also academic researchers and educators would also end up in this category. So this kind of, I think it's kind of intuitively corresponds to how I perceive that field, I think. But also I was curious also of looking at that graph and seeing what it tells us. Yes, so the big question is, if you don't really know if it's something you want to approach, if you're something you want to do. So this is actually a question from the last year's survey, which says, how do developers feel about their careers and jobs? And most of them are at least slightly satisfied, which is good, which is, I think that's a pretty encouraging. So at least I find it very exciting. And if it's something you think you would enjoy, then it's, many people would share the view of that they actually enjoy their job. Yes, so this is a bit of a funny slide. So I was going through my slides from the last year, and I'm like, oh, this one is totally outdated because you could see that it's so adorable. Like back in 2019, people used to don't really work remotely, and so there is only.
Yes, that changed now.
Yeah, that's changed a little bit. So you could see that like 12% of people were like, oh, I'm full-time remote. And I don't quite remember that, but I feel like last year I said, oh, look at that. The whole like 12% of people work remotely. This is so special. And so this year they didn't have this question on the questionnaire. For I guess understandable reasons, that would be like 100% people work remotely almost all the time. But I think it's still worth pointing out then when you decide what your next job is going to be, like the world is clearly changed, And it's clearly, you could clearly see that many industries are unfortunately struggling with moving towards the remote thing and dealing with like lack of traveling or different pandemic restrictions, which is really sad. And that's very sad for many people. And I think, but also I think that's why many people are looking towards getting some kind of job that actually can be done remotely to be able to like sustainably support themselves. And programming was kind of historically, for obvious reasons, very it's very easy to become a remote employee in this area, and I think it's something that's really worth keeping in mind also when you consider what you want to do as your next career move. Yes, but because like coming back to actually becoming a software engineer and trying to see how can you actually learn those things and what it takes. The question, the very interesting question here was, how frequently do developers actually have to learn new things? And the question is, and the answer is pretty much every few months there is something that comes up, some new framework in your language, or some new language that your company decided to adopt, or you yourself decided that it's worth pursuing. And that's, and I feel like I find it as a quite encouraging thing to actually start learning, because it means that there is no one education one can get in this area that will, so it doesn't mean that if someone graduated from the university that they kind of safe forever with their job, and there is no way you can dive into the field because someone got an education and took this job, because jobs change all the time, and it is very important to keep updated for everyone. But it also means there are opportunities, there are always opportunities to enter this market if you think that's something for you. And yeah, and then another question in how do you become a software developer? What kind of other types of education are there beside the formal education? And many, and you can see that so it was like a multi-choice question, and you could see that the majority of people said that they taught themselves a new language framework or something else without taking even a formal course. And which is, again, you could see that almost every developer that did it in their life in one way or another. And it means that there is nothing really, really preventing you from also doing that, and also from learning something even without any formal certificate or other type of education. And obviously I'm actually think that's a very good set of questions, set of answers, because they also can guide you in what it is that you can do to learn. So taking an online course is something that's usually helps a lot, because it gives you the information in the structured way. And also contributing to the open source software, it's something that allows you to get an experience without being employed, but it's still giving you something to show in your CV to your future employer. And yeah, basically all these things that I listed here, I think they're actually good points and they're worth taking a look into. Yeah, so I'm almost done here with my presentation. So here, as you could see, I listed some of the different links of different learning resources. So for example, like those online courses like Coursera and Udemy is something that's most of the people are familiar with. Also different coding competitions and interview preparation resources. And also, I believe actually the Fearless into Tech already a bit partner up a little bit with the Hack Your Future Copenhagen, because I saw that there is some interactions there. So it's also a school in Copenhagen that it's targeted towards refugees. That also helps people to learn and find their place in the Danish job market. And they also have many great resources, and they host events and so on. So it is a very good initiative, I think, to kind of pair up with and be in touch. And with all that, yeah, here's some of my contact information, and please feel free to ask me additional questions if you feel like it.
Yeah. I thank you so much, Svetlana. I mean, this was a great overview of us, as usual, from your side. I'm specifically or especially grateful to you for providing that, those slides also regarding salary and gender balance allocation, and also regarding education and how you can get into the tech sector. Regarding this, the issue of gender balance and also education, I think what I did mention at the beginning with Fearless into Tech is that we're a community that is trying to actively support the issue that this gender gap in the tech sector that we saw in that graphic that you showed, that was very, very clear, trying to close that gap by making programming more accessible, specifically for women, because sometimes we have seen that a lot of us get shy when we see this kind of graphs in front of us. We feel a bit intimidated, maybe because we think that the sector is male dominant, and unfortunately the numbers also show that. But that only should tell us that it is very, very important for us to be represented in the sector in order to also bring our perspectives, our ideas. And I think that this the mentality should also start with us questioning our perception of the sector, of programming, of languages, and of learning in general. And as Svetlana also said, there's always a way to come into the sector. You can always start learning. It doesn't matter when and how. And I hope that our community can be a way of guiding you into the sector, at least giving you a chance to try things out on your own and yeah, dare to program eventually. And I also see that we have some questions in the chat, so maybe it's time to take them.
To address them. Sorry,
so the first one says,
yeah, can you just read
them
to me, because I don't see
yes, I'm gonna read them to you, and then you can like reply to them. So the first one is, are there any part of mathematics you would recommend learning from for different type of programming jobs? Great overview. Thank you also.
Yeah, thank you for your reply. Yeah, so I would say that I guess it is quite an area of mathematics, but I think something that is extremely useful as an introduction, like when you start learning about programming, is learning about algorithms. And you can Google, like, actually I didn't include any books into my like links overview, because I feel like this also you can find the courses, and the courses would refer you to books. But if you search for like for example something like algorithmic thinking on Coursera, actually it's I will probably give those links later, maybe in the Slack channel or something. So something that's called algorithmic thinking on Coursera, or introduction to algorithms, or basically things that mention algorithms, and the books that tell you about algorithms. This is a great way to start, because this is a kind of a sub area of something that's called discrete mathematics, and it's something that will walk you through how to implement different concepts in the most efficient way from the algorithmic perspective. For example, how to perform a search in the array, like it would introduce to the very fundamental concepts of programming, which I think will help you greatly later, when you will be switching between programming languages and learning them deeper. So I think this kind of stuff would really be helpful.
Thanks. Then there is a question regarding which programming language would you recommend for administrators in the healthcare industry?
Okay, administrators, I guess you don't mean system administrators, maybe? Yeah, I guess you mean like an administrator of like a of a hospital or something.
No, system administrators.
System administrators. Okay, yeah. No. So for that, yeah. So I don't think administrators in healthcare would be actually different from general DevOps system administrator job. I think they kind of.
I think she means generally people who work as administrators in hospitals and healthcare. So not yet like as development operation, not like, DevOps, but more like if you're a healthcare manager at the hospital, what would you maybe eventually start with?
Yeah, I think that depends on your daily tasks, but I could clearly see that, for example, if your daily tasks include fetching information quickly about maybe different patients or something like that. So I think working with something like SQL for getting things kind of directly from database, because I understand that the databases in like healthcare organization, it's something that's really secure and really, there's a software that like, kind of does some things for you probably. But I think that there must be a way that you can work with maybe more direct SQL requests, and that sometimes is more convenient. Sometimes not, because it's also kind of hard for me to tell it without knowing what your daily needs are, what your daily tasks are. But and also I would always recommend maybe something general purpose like Python to do something. If for example you are often required to make some reports, or if you have different files that you need to copy around, files that you need to store, maybe some Excel sheets that you regularly need to review or merge or analyze. In this case, I would say Python, because it's kind of a data analytics tool and also a general purpose languages. So yeah, so as far as I understand your concerns and daily tasks, that would be roughly the direction I would take.
Excellent. And then we have a question regarding the slide that we see on the screen at the moment.
Yeah.
And whether it is a global survey or just a European survey.
It's a
Do you know
global
something
survey.
about that?
Yes,
It's a global survey.
It's a global survey, yes.
Yeah. Is there, is if there is also any way to see not only a reflection of the gender balance in IT jobs, but also like generally the question of diversity in IT jobs? Do you think, or do you know any survey about that?
Actually, if you click on that link below, just on this slide, I understand you. I just realized you cannot do it now.
Yes.
I can. Yes. Okay, it's just like a few minutes. I will share those slides, and there is, if you you would see this whole survey. There are many more questions, and then you could find that they also did some survey on the diversity in general and like representation of LGBTQ community and different racial profiles and so on. So this is something that
at a global level.
Yeah, at a global level, yes. So I don't think there was I think you could see some of this information for United States and global, but not really Europe or Denmark. That kind of information I don't have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't see any more questions in the chat, but I do think I would like to ask you another question, if it is okay. So from your experience, you said that at the beginning, you said that for you, the path into tech or into programming wasn't also, a natural path. How did you start, and what was your experience regarding how to start? What was the easy way for you to start?
How did I actually start is when I was on the last year of my bachelor degree, and then I was working on my bachelor thesis, which was about analyzing stock prices data. And surprisingly, because right now I can see how it is a very like this data science kind of analytical task, and that programming would be very natural thing to teach to the students. But for some reason in our curriculum there wasn't any programming whatsoever. And but then my my advisor just showed me like he was like, okay, and to calculate this metric you just run this R script, and that was in programming language R. And I was like, and that's how you could do it? Like this whole time you've hid this information from me. So I was actually really captivated by how many things are much easier once you like dive into. So of course there is a bit of a barrier of entering the field, learning the new concepts, but once you learn, to be frank, not really a whole lot, but like some basic concepts, you can already see how it immediately benefits maybe some adjacent fields or some other job that you do. Like someone mentioned this health, like if you work in healthcare and you have some, you know, data analytical tasks and so on, you can immediately apply what you learned to many other fields. And that was really kind of as I was kind of immediately sold, and it was really interesting for me. And so another part of your question was about how did I first learn? And actually, I think the most of my like early education, so before, because to be able to qualify for this master program I was in, you already had to hold an exam, like to show that you're able to program on a certain level. So you couldn't be like a complete beginner to enter that program. And for that, actually, my friend helped me a whole lot. So we had like one friend and like another friend who was also helping me. So basically, it was, I'd say, like due to community learning. So yes, thing, because I also didn't have any like formal education, and also because it was it was almost, yeah, it was almost 10 years ago, as I now see. So even like Coursera wasn't such a big thing. Even like the online courses, they were not, they started to appear fairly quickly, yeah, like after that. But in that very year when I kind of needed it most, the Coursera wasn't still like pilot phase, I think. So I feel like now it's really, really nice. Like there's a lot more resources these days, but I'd say help from your community, help from your network is something that was really defining for me here.
That's great. Do you have any concrete tips for total beginners on how to dive into the sector? Maybe, you know, what to start with. Yeah, any advice, any tools that you could recommend?
Yes, so I'd say, because it also depends kind of from language to language, right? So, but I think the kind of what I usually do if I need to learn something new like this, I find an online course, because online courses, especially in programming, there is really a lot of them, and I can try and find some that I saw or something that I heard recommendations about, but you can just, you know, also go to your own search. And because I feel like in the online course, the information is presented in more or less structured way. So it's not like you get in some articles from here, some tutorials from there, but you actually get a certain structure, and then it can be your start into things. So it kind of lets you put the things in the boxes and figure out what they are, and then you can continue searching on your own. So some kind of guided learning, like an online course, I think it's a good idea to start with.
Thank you, Svetlana. Any other questions maybe from somebody else here in the meeting? Anything else you would add? Doesn't seem to be the case. Otherwise, I would say I think we will be posting all the links that you shared with us, Svetlana. The recommendations, the tips, your contact details, if it is okay, on our social media, on Facebook and LinkedIn. Yes. And also, yeah, keep an eye on our activities, as because as I announced at the beginning, we will definitely be also be launching other webinars on coding, more deep dive and specific use cases on how you can actually use the programs that Svetlana introduced tonight to own your job, actually, to do something. But also we will touch upon issues on career development and how to improve your skills in that regard if you're looking for a job, also how to learn to network, also everything for the Danish market. And without yeah, with all of that, I would like to thank you again for joining us tonight. Thank you, Svetlana. Thank you so much for your time and for this really great overview.
Yeah, and also, as I mentioned, you can totally write me on LinkedIn or something if you have, you know, any questions. So, yeah.
Super. Thank you, everybody, and have a nice evening. Bye.
Bye-bye.